What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another comic book spoiler review. And today we'll be covering the X-Men event Onslaught. Onslaught, one of the biggest rose gallery of the X-Men that they ever had to face. He was created by Mark Waid and Andy Kubert. And of course, during around time, Onslaught was, brought to pass. It was during a tumultuous time in like the early 90s, 93 to be exact, where Marvel Company was pretty much like tanking for the most part, because the only books they were selling was X-Men and Spider-Man at the time. All the other stuff wasn't really doing so hot. And of course, you can look this up in during, like, because looking at it through 2024's eyes, back then it's like, okay, we see like the writings on the wall. And at that time, 93, they was laying off at least over 200 employees and everything like that. It was like, Marvel Comics was like, they was on a high up until 93, where it's like stuff like Avengers, Captain America, like anything that wasn't X-Men or Spider-Man related, it was not selling well. Matter of fact, it was most of the reason why, like, certain things was being sold off to certain spots, like, the way they were. Like Todd McFarlane had a couple of things, doing like art on some things. It was just like it was a rough state. I can't really say verbatim of each bullet point, but just like, business wise, they wasn't doing too well. So they had to come up with something like, okay, we need to like get rid of some of these people that aren't doing so hot. So they had this character of Onslaught in their back pocket, so they used this character to make a like ultimate villain that would pretty much like kill off a lot of characters that wasn't doing so well. So like I said, you can look up online about what happened with the backstory with the creation of Onslaught and the Marvel Company at the time of 93 and things like that to get the full detail, because it was just like a rough spot. And essentially they did they pulled a DC crisis on us at that time, whereas kind of like the way they did with New 52 with DC, where it's like, oh, got too many stuff in the kitchen. We need to minimize all this stuff. So what we do, okay, we go through a crisis. That way we can get rid of all the stuff that's like, too excessive that, people don't want to work on. So we just minimize just down to like, oh, New 52 Earths, so we can focus on these hyper specific people that we can guarantee make some sales. That didn't work, because it's like, okay, you make everything way too edgy. There's a lot more characters that you could expand upon. You were like, big on multiverse, because DC was the first one to do it. There's a whole thing, and pretty much for the most part, New 52 tanked for DC when they pulled that stunt in the early 2000s, or at least the mid 2000s. Anyway, so Onslaught. So the way the story goes off with like a big deal, where Juggernaut was, got laid the smackdown on and fell at the feet of the X-Men mansion, and he was just whimpering out the words, "Onslaught is coming." And it's like, who's Onslaught? What the heck is going on? Who's Onslaught? somebody as powerful as Juggernaut is not an easy feat to knock down the Juggernaut. You need like heavy hitters like the Guardian from the Shi'ar Empire, or the Hulk or Thor, in order to really lay out Juggernaut. Hell, even like Colossus and Ben Grimm have a tough time dealing with a one-on-one fight with Juggernaut. So we got Jean Grey at the time out shopping, and then she gets psychically attacked by this big red behemoth who is trying to recruit her onto his side, because he sees like, okay, humanity is no for them. They're just, all of them are assholes. They're below us, and we should treat them as such. They're just hypocrites. That all of them are just duplicitous, just lower life forms compared to the Homo superior. And she doesn't believe that. And in the astral plane, he's showing them like Grant and Creed, who run for president. And of course, she like not too tripping about that, because look, I know Grant Creed, he's a mutant hater. He's not gonna, people will eventually see what a creep he is. He's not gonna get far. So I have hope that people see through his machinations. But then it's like, oh, that's fine. Let me show you somebody that is a little closer to home. And then she, Onslaught shows her the mind of her father figure, essentially, in Professor X, and say like, everybody's hypocrites, even your oppressive Professor Xavier. And she thinks like, oh, you're full of crap. And it's like, oh no, look into his mind. It's so her to pass, because they enter his brain and look in the deep recesses of his memories. They kind of stamp down in a way back in his recesses of mind that he essentially like kind of ignored and kind of left in by the wayside, but it's still there. And then she sees that during the early phases of bringing like the X-Men together, she introduces like Scott and Jean for the first time, as she's part of like the new member of the X-Men, blah blah blah. But she sees what he was thinking, how that he had like a thing for her. It's kind of gross, because the fact that like you knew her when she was a child, that you helped essentially raise her before she became old enough to become part of the X-Men team. And it's like, bro, it is nasty. I don't like to just throw around the word grooming in this way, because people like to throw around that word willy-nilly. Essentially isn't that what this is either. But some people might look at this and it's like, oh my god, he was grooming her. But no, he mistakenly grew feelings for, because he became into her own woman, but he had like a moment of those kind of feelings, but he stamped all that out. He ignored all that stuff. But Jean sees this, and it's like, it's kind of weird that maybe she's like, see this, I'm about to say like, okay, it's funny how she never ever bring this back up to him in future things, but I guess she kind of resigned herself, like, okay, it's the way it was way back in his mind. He never thought about that kind of stuff. He never pulled anything or anything of that matter of the sort. But she was just kind of taken aback at the fact that he used to have these deep feelings for her, so she's kind of a shock. But Onslaught is just essentially showing her the hypocrisy of everybody, and we have to unify. We have to like deal with the these useless humans and rise our people above them and rule. But she ain't with that. And then before he cast her out of the astral plane, he secondly branded her forehead, which she sees in the only she's able to see in the mirror temporarily, the word Onslaught, because she doesn't know who the heck are you. And he said, I'll tell you who I am. And she sees like the words Onslaught written on her forehead. So now, you know, things are kind of picking up. And of course, if you read enough comic books over time, you know, you are familiar with the character of Onslaught. Or if you are millennial, especially, you probably would be familiar with or Gen X, you probably be familiar with the character of Onslaught. I'm not going to bury the lead here. Onslaught is Professor Xavier. Now, I remember reading comics. I wasn't like a avid collector. I read what I can at that time that was given to me, because my uncle had like a whole plethora of comics, and I read what I could that he had, because he had a whole bunch. I couldn't read them all. As I mentioned many videos before, that before he sold most of it, he let me keep like a big box full of it. It's stuff that like had like, you know, not everything, just those who had like like he had two or three of the same comic. I can just get like at least one copy of them. Like I goofishly or stupidly got mostly most of it is stuff that's like Spider-Man related, but I got a few stuff here and there to like at least like, you know, have like at least a variety as much as I can. But I grabbed, because I was so into Spider-Man, I grabbed most of the stuff I have is Spider-Man related. But I had like a fair amount of X-Men stuff, and most of those stuff involved like little tie-ins or stuff about what's going on in the wider world of Marvel Comics at that time, which was like Onslaught, because that was a big thing. And like in the mid 90s was like in the comics and Marvel was like Onslaught is coming. It like expanded into like the wider world of the Marvel universe, not like just in terms of like in New York, but it was big enough for like the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and the X-Men to have to get involved, and some, you know, X-Factor, X-Force stuff here and there too. And speaking of which, now I'm on the subject, there are tie-ins. I read a few of them that has some kind of that, you know, more significance to the main story of Onslaught that facilitates in the main story, like X Factor, who was at the time being led by Forge, you know, with the whole Sentinel that eventually Onslaught takes over the, you know, a Sentinel facility to use as essentially like a metal army essentially, and they have to deal with that. I'll bring that up later, but there's, you know, one with the Hulk that doesn't really add much to anything, but you see how he gets involved. There's a couple of Fantastic Four stuff I'll talk about, but only briefly, because they have more of a significance than X-Force. X-Force has like a moment with Sinister, but only will briefly touch on, but it doesn't add much to the overall narrative. Anyway, we got Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, who at the time left X Factor to join with the X-Men, and he has a little, he has a ill feelings. Like, he's new, he's young, he's one of the young superheroes at the time, and he's a little like, okay, I don't know my place here yet. And he's trying to talk with Xavier, and Xavier is acting out of character, very out of character, where he's kind of, you know, very snippy and snide and essentially downright fucking rude. And here Sam is trying to confide in him about his uneasiness, and Professor Xavier is like, well, just fucking go then. got like you're hopping, you're carrying on about this, you whining. It's like I'm trying to hear this stuff. Like, you gonna stay, you gonna go. I'm not gonna sit there and like be bothered by this bull crap. And like this is essentially how you carrying on. And Sam is kind of taken aback. It's like, wow, this is like Professor's kind of fucking well a fucking dick. Like, damn. And so he talks, Sam talks to Cyclops later, and Cyclops trying to like, he was like that. He was sticking with me from time to time back in my younger years. You learn to either brush it off or just kind of realize that he more than likely is going through something, and he probably doesn't mean it what he says, blah blah blah, but then things pick back up when the level of seriousness comes into play, where Juggernaut comes to Jean Grey for help because he knows who Onslaught is, but because Onslaught messed with his mind, he can't verbally say who Onslaught is, because Onslaught's trying to keep it a secret, until he's at a certain power level. He's biding his time for a little bit to where his power's at a certain peak where the X-Men can't just like one shot him. So he needs Jean Grey to get inside his mind of because he wants to warn them about this, who Onslaught is, because he is terrified. And of course, we know it's Xavier, because essentially, this is one of the things I really, because Fox had the X-Men for a very long time, and for the most part, they can only tell stories around Wolverine and for the most part, and like the Phoenix, Dark Phoenix saga. But there's so much stories involving, of course they did Days of Future Past with the movie Days of Future Past, but there's so much stories that you can delve into, like Onslaught, because it's an incredible story. It wasn't handled all too well, given the fact that we know now what happened behind the scenes, that they just retroactively put this together. Still pretty decent, but just to kill off certain characters that wasn't selling books all that well for Marvel. But some people have a bit of a nostalgia for Onslaught because he thought it was, he's essentially a very creative character. Because this picks up after the events of Fatal Attractions, I think it was called, where, because here, when you're reading through this story, Wolverine looks a little bit more feral and he has bone claws now. It's because, and this kind of leads into why Xavier turned into Onslaught, because you see in like a particular Wolverine tie-in, because Wolverine has like a feeling bad about what carrying on, because he feels partly responsible, because during Fatal Attractions, after it seems like Magneto is apparently alive after they suspected him being dead for so long, and he went kind of harder than he usually was to, and being a little more lethal, more dangerous, and the X-Men trying to stop him. He, Wolverine went at him first because Wolverine was taunting him, and it kind of struck a chord. So out of sheer like anger, he pulled all the adamantium out through Wolverine's body. It's one of the most iconic and more horrific things seen in Marvel comics to this day, more specifically X-Men comics to this day. And it causes like his healing factor to go into full overdrive, and it kind of like, I forget why, but it reverted. Wolverine's mind just reverted to a more bestial nature, and for some reason he doesn't have a freaking nose. For some reason he wearing like because of that he had to wear this mask for a while. uh uh and all the while Beast is trying to see what they can do to kind of fix that, essentially, to get him to look back to what he used to look like. Oh, and also we're dealing with Dark Beast, because I think, like, uh Days of Future Past, or it was Age of Apocalypse event happened previously than this, and Dark Beast from an alternate universe came into the main universe, kidnapped our Hank McCoy, holding him hostage. We'll touch on that in a bit. So he's been pretending to be our Beast, all the while experimenting on Morlocks and other mutants and stuff like that. This dude is just like a Homelander version of Hank McCoy, essentially. Of course, he's playing the part. Well, nobody knows, except for Onslaught, and he mentions, like, I already knew that you wasn't the real Hank McCoy. I've been hiding your identity this whole long time. You ever notice why all these powerful sockets in this building never once picked up on the fact that you're not who you say you are? I've been hiding you this whole long time, because I have some use for you, that kind of thing. So there's so much stuff going around, this whole swirling around, that leads up to this whole Onslaught situation. And essentially, after what happened with Wolverine, Xavier kind of essentially snapped. And it's like, Magneto has done, so much horrific stuff, and despite him trying to be his friend, give him the benefit of the doubt, or try to, like, think, like, I can speak kindly to you, I know you, but this was the last straw for him. So he used his powers to essentially completely mind wipe Magneto, something or not mind wipe essentially, but just try to leave him freaking catatonic, essentially. It's something that nobody ever expect Xavier to do, ever. So this was a catalyst. There's more to it, but I'm going to wait until a little bit later to just touch on this. But this was the catalyst that leads into Xavier's kind of downfall, because essentially Onslaught saga is pretty much like Xavier's Dark Phoenix saga. So him attacking Juggernaut, essentially, this is what I want, like, the MCU to touch on, is aside leave alone Dark Phoenix, leave alone, like, the Wolverine stories, tackle stuff that you haven't tackled yet, or at least Fox haven't tackled before. It was like Onslaught, which was essentially all of Xavier's pent up rage and bottled up emotions, things that he haven't dealt with or pushed aside for, like, the greater good, because he's the most powerful psychic in the world. He can't afford to, like, have him losing control, and he kind of bottled things up for such a long period of time. And essentially, this is Onslaught is all of Xavier's negative emotions brought in physical manifestation. And especially, he's like watching the news with Grander Creed, who he and many mutants know he's just like a horrific son of Sabretooth with no mutant powers, and he's just doing everything he can to make life horrible for mutants every step he can. And then he sees also on the news where this human has beaten to death a young mutant teenager, and it's just like he's just losing it. It's like all this stuff is like bubbling up, because all the stuff he's kept suppressed with this kind of stuff, he always been kept suppressed. Like, no, we can, his belief, like, we can make it through this, we can change hearts and minds, we can help out humanity, show that not every mutant is bad, all this stuff. But it's just too much at this point. He's mentally, essentially, he's like snapped. And so now he's just like okay, done with all this crap. So while Jean finally get inside Juggernaut's head and find out who is Onslaught really is, which they like to, unless you was like an avid comic book collector back in the 90s, you wouldn't know essentially who Onslaught is. You're picking it apart because you're reading tie-ins, or like I was looking at tie-ins and other stories that's normally in the background of what the main Onslaught story is. So I never knew until when I was in my 20s, where I finally just looked up who the frick Onslaught was, and it was Xavier this whole time. It was my early 20s, I think. It was like, I don't know, somewhere between 18 to 21, something like that. When I finally looked it up, it was like, okay, who the frick was Onslaught this whole doggone time? It was killing me as a little kid. I finally figured out who it was. But it was like a cool story that I wish like the MCU would tackle, at least tackle some stuff, leave out certain cringy stuff that does not work. I'll get to it in a minute, but it's a cool concept where you that you can get like most of the Marvel universe, especially the X-Men, involved because he is such a lethal threat. So while Jean finally figures it out, she realized, Juggernaut, you need to get the heck out of here. Get out of here, run. Onslaught is in the is on the premises. You need to run, get as far away as you can as possible. But it's too late. Onslaught picked up on the fact that Juggernaut is on the premises. He get inside his head and pretty much pulled out the Crimson Gem of Sidorak from his body, leaving him a normal human being. Because like King Marco constantly was the step brother of Xavier, and all through their childhood he's been like picking on him and messing with him every which way he can, because he was just a complete bastard to Xavier for no exact reason. And Xavier has kept that balled up because like he's the only family member. It's like sure he's an asshole, but he's the only family I have left, because my stepfather is gone, even though he has his own issues. My father passed away, then my mother passed away. He's essentially the only family I have left alive. But now it's like all that little anger he had towards Juggernaut is coming to the forefront now, and he's beating the hell out of this dude because like remember when he caused that accident that left me in the hospital? I was like, bastard, all that stuff. It's like Xavier is like gone full fucking dark side. It's like he's drank the Kool-Aid of Palpatine, essentially. It's gone full dark side. Now like the X-Men are getting like a ping psychically from Xavier, like I need you, my X-Men, come to my library. And they all come in, and of course Jean doesn't want to let on what she knows, because that will because also will pick that up. You gotta keep it in, keep it blocked until the time is right where she can let everybody else know what the heck is going on. And all the while Xavier is in his chair by the fireplace speaking about like essentially conquering rhetoric about like I thought we can make peaceful coexistence, but hey, I was wrong. Maybe we should just start like ruling these peons. And everybody's looking like what are you talking about? It's like, are you and Scott is talking to Jean like, are you listening to this mess? Because they are taking it back, because it's not something like Xavier would ever say. But then Jean looks over and sees the Crimson Gem sitting up against the wall with Juggernaut trapped inside. And then she just like realized, Scott, we gotta get out of here. And then of course Xavier's like, oh, she knows. Like, okay, no need to hide. And so you see the manifestation of Onslaught was pretty much like Super Shredder Magneto. So Onslaught, lay out the whammy on the X-Men, except for Beast, who known as Dark Beast, says like, I will, serve you because you're magnificent and everything like that. So, and this is around the time where everybody comes to realize this isn't the Beast that everybody knows. Eventually, they find Hank McCoy, and that's how we end up getting him back. Which I didn't think, because it seems like as a kid it took like forever to realize, okay, when everybody's gonna realize this Beast ain't the real Beast, kind of situation. So we come to realize what the machinations of what little by little we starting to get like what Onslaught is after. He's been psychically trying to connect to young Franklin Richards, the son of Reed and Sue Richards of the Fantastic Four. And he's around like 5, 6-ish at the time. Because in current comics, he's like in his mid to late teens at this point. And Franklin Richards is a mutant. Of course, somebody, I forgot who, retconned all that stuff in the past couple of years, was kind of like bogus as hell, because I guess they're saying like, oh, Franklin's way too freaking powerful, so let's kind of take that away, which I think that's kind of lame. But Franklin Richards, for the longest time, had reality warping powers. He pretty much do anything he wanted with his imagination. And so Onslaught is trying to gain control of his abilities. And also of Nate Gray, who came from an alternate timeline that's in the present time now, who's essentially proto Cable, essentially, because he has psychic powers, but also he can like manifest, astral projections and things like that. Psychically make them real, whatever. So Onslaught is after these two particular mutants because at the time they're the most powerful ones, and he needs it to gain, because he already has like the power of magnetism that he gained from messing around with the mind of Magneto after he tried to shut it down. Which also leads into this character Joseph, which is pretty much like from what I looked up, it's a clone of Magneto without all of his like edgelordiness from like abuse from all humanity that he suffered, that left him turning against humanity altogether and wanted to rule, blah 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 blah. So now he and Rogue is on this kind of road trip, and she sees like a softer side, a different side of Magneto that she feels like, oh, I can help cultivate this so he can be a better person than he had a chance to when he was growing up originally. That kind of thing is going on. So once the X-Men realize, okay, Onslaught is after these two, we need to warn the Fantastic Four, but and then the Avengers, because I think Nick Gray at the time was with the Avengers. We need to warn the Avengers and the Fantastic Four that Onslaught is coming, but while they try to see if they can deal with it themselves first, Onslaught made his escape because he had more pressing matters, because he needs to get these two, because he needs the other two most powerfulest mutants he can in order to be top dog, period, among the superhero community. At least the most powerful mutant on the planet. All the while, you see also going on in the background is Apocalypse And Watu the Watcher sing. Of course, Watu always shows up when big life-changing moments in the Marvel universe is about to pop off. He ends up popping up in the background sometimes. Him and Apocalypse is going to be seen from time to time, watching this stuff go on, because we know, what's going to happen with most of the superhero, at least 30%, at least 30 of the superhero community, what's going to happen to them. So the Avengers eventually show up at the Axe Mansion, and you see Wanda and Pietro, and they let them know about the mind of Magneto kind of mess with Xavier, or merge with it. So it's kind of like a combination. They're both their psyches kind of birthed this new entity known as Onslaught, and now he in a comic there's like a thing where it's like Xavier's beliefs plus Magneto's beliefs equals Onslaught's beliefs, where it's like a perversion of what Xavier always dreamed of with coexistence with humans and mutants, but with the mix in with Magneto's usurp humanity by enemies necessary, makes coexistence by enemies necessary kind of situation, something like that. So Wanda and Pietro's kind of who's with the Avengers at this point in time, are taken aback because God, he's supposed to be dead, and once again he's still messing with us, because they left scarred with the whole situation with being used to be part of the Brotherhood, and how abusive he was, and manipulative and all the other stuff. So now they gotta track down Joseph, who's with Rogue, and of course Gambit is a little upset because at that time they were on the outs, and he's a little jealous, but not to the detriment of the overall big picture of the whole situation. He's pretty much handling like a champ as much as he can. So they eventually track down Joseph, give everybody the lowdown on what's happening, and they gotta find the Fantastic Four and try to save their son from Professor Xavier, who now at this point, done with the subterfuge after they finally grabbed hold of Franklin. He's starting to attack the FF at the time in the Four Freedoms Plaza. And of course, Reed is kind of don't go anywhere near my son. And you see him put all the steps with his powers, where bulking up to the size of Onslaught himself, and try to beat him. But of course, it's all in fealty. He knocks all of them out and takes Franklin. So now Wolverine, who's on a separate mission, meets up with this mutant named Gateway, who has essentially teleporting powers, but also show images of past and present kind of situation. And Wolverine, like I said, is kind of blames himself because only reason Xavier snapped the way he did because he saw he was hurt because he foolishly jumped in and antagonized unnecessarily Magneto, and then Magneto retaliated, stripped him of his adamantium, and out of sheer anger, Xavier himself retaliated. And we also see, this is where the stupid part comes in, when Xavier trying to shut down Magneto's mind, a piece of Magneto, some kind of impish thing that was a part of Magneto, jumped out of him and entered the psyche of Xavier, which I think everybody is in agreement. That's so stupid. You couldn't just leave it alone where it just why? Because I guess they had to explain why he chose a perversion look of what Magneto looks like with his costume. I guess they had to explain that away, but it's like you couldn't just leave it at the fact that it's just Xavier just just mentally got mentally he just kind of snapped. You couldn't just leave it there where he's just like all the stuff he kept balled up kind of just burst at a certain point when he saw what happened to one of his pupils. Here's one of those tie-ins with like X Factor, and they essentially say, because they work for X Factor, works for the government essentially, and they had Victor Creed as their, it's kind of like a Victor Creed and Mystique. It's kind of like the whole Suicide Squad kind of scenario where they got pretty much like a shock collar kind of situation where to keep them under control, especially Sabretooth. But ironically, it's thanks to Sabretooth where he managed to find the real Beast, and they stopped essentially the whole machinations of Dark Beast. But they failed their mission to stop like Onslaught from taking over the Sentinels that was stockpiled there. So yeah, we get like a brief moment of the real Hank McCoy. Of course, they had to put in like a joke about the real McCoy, and they had to put that in there. Why wouldn't you? Finally, duking it out with Dark Beast. Finally, and lay his ass out, but he made his escape thanks to his other teleporting mutant named Fatale, because Onslaught starting to recruit certain mutants onto his side of things. And of course, you get certain times with Spider-Man at the time, after the whole Clone Saga situation where Ben Reilly is pretty much taking up the Spider-Man mantle while Peter's powers are going in and out, and Mary Jane is pregnant at the time. This is before One More Day, where Mephisto wiped all that away in order to save Aunt May's life, because at the time everybody's in agreement that Peter Parker could not just let that go and let that old woman die peacefully, but that was a thing. But he gets involved in this kind of thing, but he won't die because his comics are selling. And of course, X-Force, is dealing with things with Sinister and Nate Gray, but through this whole ordeal, Onslaught kidnaps Nate Gray. So now the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and X-Men are dealing with all, pretty much Onslaught's, occupying New York essentially, and with all these Sentinels, and most of them are dealing with the robots trying to take them down, while others are working on, like Reed Richards trying to figure out a way to nullify his powers, and Iron Man's trying to come up with like a shield or armor essentially to pretty much keep, like, because we're dealing with Xavier, most powerful psychic. We need the defenses against that. That's essentially, they got to work on that so they can get, because Reed's trying to work on a way to get Nate and Franklin out of, because he also is pretty much absorbed both guys within himself, so he can utilize their powers, and they try to figure out a way to get them out. But then Onslaught threw a blitz, essentially utilizing the powers of his powers magnified by Franklin and Nate Gray pretty much throughout this massive EMP. Definitely covered New York, but I don't think it covered that much of the globe. But this massive EMP shockwave that not only takes out technology, but also uproots the ground and breaks a bunch of glass from all the buildings and stuff like that. It's a massive downgrade for the city. Meanwhile, inside the body of Onslaught, Xavier is there, but he's knocked out essentially for a bit. He eventually kind of comes to, but Franklin knows him because they know the X-Men and Avengers are friends with his parents. He's trying to get Xavier to wake up, but Onslaught's like, it's Feudal Boy, he's down for the count, don't worry about it, but I'm here. Okay, let me go on to another group of slides here. One second. One more, people. A minor interlude. 1 second. So now people have to, like, Gambit is the only one that seems to feel like, okay, we gotta let Joseph know his past because he doesn't fully remember who he once was, but then Gambit was the one who had to break it down to him, which he doesn't take it too well, knowing that the fact that he caused so much atrocities as he was when he was previously Magneto. Of course, he was a clone, so all that kind of doesn't really matter at the end of things, where because eventually the whole Joseph persona will be gone eventually. But thanks to the teamwork of all the superheroes, they managed to gain an opening where Thor eventually one-shots Onslaught after he's starting to evolve into more like a grotesque creature. Essentially, he manages to get Xavier, because they was hoping to get Franklin, at least somebody, but they managed to get Xavier out of him at least, hoping that kind of like neuters Onslaught to some degree. But Onslaught already essentially flipped an off switch in Xavier's brain to keep him from mentally fighting him. So for a while, Xavier won't have any powers, especially after the events of this Onslaught event. He won't have his powers for at least a little bit. Eventually, he get turned back on. But they managed to use that one shot to get Xavier out. But then, with Watu's coaxing to Apocalypse, and I really love this image of Apocalypse. Probably the best looking I've seen Apocalypse look in a comic book in a while. I mean, of course, in recent stuff, some stuff has been some cool designs, but this is the way it gleams and the look. It looks like this is like a pitch perfect depiction of Apocalypse I had ever seen. The art in many of this stuff. Of course, there's different artists and writers involved in this story. It was usually the same writer, but there's different artists during this event. But this is like probably my favorite art depiction I ever seen. So Cable eventually does get involved, but then Uatu convinces Apocalypse, things could get very bad. He gives him some line dialogue, and then Apocalypse thinks to himself, okay, I won't be able to usher in my age of Apocalypse if Onslaught takes over, because he'll eventually grow too powerful even for me. So I better do something. Of course, for a while, Apocalypse was resigned, sitting in the background, just watching this unfold, because he has the mindset of survival of the fittest, and he respects only that, if he respects anything. But now he realized, okay, I gotta get involved. But he's always wants some self-interest. Same thing with Dr. Doom, because he eventually wants to get involved, because he's trying to, just like with like Silver Surfer or the Galactus, he's trying to siphon off powerful entities into himself. Or same thing he did with the Beyonders at one point during Secret Wars. He sees himself as God, a benevolent God, things like that. He eventually tried to like siphon off Onslaught's powers using this makeshift machine he creates. But of course, Hawkeye, sees that coming from a mile away. He shoots an arrow through that, and he and Dr. Doom, he pushes himself and Dr. Doom into this bubble that eventually, destroys a lot of superheroes and stuff like that. That carries on. I just want to lay it out for you guys. So Apocalypse, teaming up with Cable and Sue Storm, tries to get inside the astral plane of Onslaught, try to rescue Franklin. But Apocalypse takes it upon himself, like, I'm going to have to kill the child, because without him, that severely cripples Onslaught's abilities. But of course, Sue, thanks to Cable keeping them secretly psychically connected, realize, oh, he's going to pull a fast one. I know him. So Sue is prepared for that. So they pretty much put a barrier on there, get Apocalypse out of the astral plane. Of course, Onslaught knew they was already there. They just want to see how it plays out. But he knew they wasn't going to be able to get too far without him putting a stop to that. So Apocalypse is pretty much like pieced out. Fine. I was helping, but needs of the many, blah blah blah. So he's like, oh no, I can't like do that. 1 second. I've been talking so much, I need to get a drink of water or tea. So, Uatu kind of points out, like, do you really think you would have had a chance? You didn't think like these mortals would fight tooth and nail for their survival, even against somebody like you? And Apocalypse kind of scoffs because he doesn't really care. And of course, you can see things with Dr. Doom. He knows what's going on, like I mentioned. And Franklin, in like a Fantastic Four tie-in, tries to use his powers to like send some kind of, psychic or astral type of, using his rally warping powers, trying to send some kind of signal secretly. He thinks it's secretly, but he's 5 years old. He can't, dealing with somebody like Onslaught coming from using Xavier's powers. He already peeped what this kid was trying to do, but in hopes of trying to send like a signal to his parents and let them know he's okay, Onslaught twisted that, making it, into all the Fantastic Four's enemies they ever fought, like Super Skrull, Power Scroll, or I forgot, like I think it's Power Scroll, or something, some other scroll, and even Kang the Conqueror, the Frightful Four, all these old enemies of the Fantastic Four just showing up all of a sudden in this building. But then all the Fantastic Four's allies that used to have been part of the Fantastic Four members all show up to lend a hand. The Inhumans, Black Panther, even Doctor Doom, they all help out to deal with these fake entities. Even Namor the Submariner shows up. So it's a dope, it's like this is like a good poster here. It's like all the FF, the Inhumans, all the She-Hulk, all the people who ever was a part of the FF and allied with FF, because they're Marvel's first family, mind you. And it's like, we're doing this, even teaming up with somebody like Doctor Doom, because we want our son back, and I will fight tooth and nail to this entity in order to get my son back. And it's like and even Reed Richards, on rare occasions, they other members of the FF use the line, "It's clobbering time," and Ben Grimm's like, "Nuff said." It's really dope. Even have a moment with even though Namor had a thing for Sue, he even teams up with somebody like him to I want my son, and I want to do whatever I can to team up whomever I can and do whatever I can to get my son back. Then we get a moment where Xavier had a heart-to-heart with his kind of old friend, realizing they both are essentially responsible for this Onslaught character, because he's a twisted version of both of them, and they have to do whatever they can to put a stop to it, because it's their responsibility. And of course, they both essentially, on a rare occasion where Magneto's, that you ever gonna get him apologizing for all the stuff that he did to put them through. So it's a dope moment where they essentially have a long heart-to-heart talk. But then Xavier leaves on his own while everybody else is going through a battle strategy in order to deal with Onslaught. Xavier tries to talk this thing down, but of course Onslaught's not listening, tries to obliterate Xavier, but the X-Men show up and they finally try to take this sucker down, but they're not powerful enough. But here comes the Avengers, the Fantastic Four. They all show up to deal with this thing. It's a really dope splash page where it's you get many of the superhero communities, not everybody, but a great deal enough to deal with this Onslaught character. So it's a really dope page. But then Onslaught eventually reaches his final form, and he's just pure second energy. Thor gets an idea, because they pretty much cracked his armor, but he's just pure second energy right now. But Thor gets his idea where he can absorb because he absorbs so much storms and energy and stuff like that, because he's a god of thunder. He tries to go through this thing to absorb all this enough as he can, but even he's not enough. But that gives Reed an idea. It's okay, everybody but mutants go through this thing, because that will pretty much dissipate Onslaught in order to get rid of him. But if a mutant goes in there, then he'll just pretty much take over the body of that, and we'll go through this rigmarole all over again. So this is kind of a clunky, looking back, this is a really clunky way of trying to get rid of everybody that's not selling at the time. So Reed instructs the X-Men, okay, once we all through there, we'll need you guys to blast this thing and just save our son. So, like, you know, the Avengers going through there, like, Wanda goes through there, even though she's technically a mutant, but they keep playing fast and loose with Xavier, with Wanda and Pietro. There, for God's sake, just leave it the fact that they're mutants and be done with it. But she goes through there, but Quicksilver does not. So the Fantastic Four goes through there. You know, Hawkeye, you know, dumps, you know, tackles Doom into that thing. Samara goes through there. A lot of them goes through there that's not, you know, X-Men or Spider-Man related. Spider-Man's not even on the battlefield because he was dealing with stuff on his own tie-in. Because if he was there, he would have jumped through, no doubt. So he can't be a part of this here. Of course, Doctor Strange ain't a part of this because I guess his stuff ain't selling, so they ain't really worried about that all too well. He's on a different astral plane or whatever. And of course, you know, Warbird, Carol Danvers at that time, she wasn't selling all that much anyway, so nobody really cared much about Warbird or Captain Marvel at the time. So it dissipated. They save Nick Gray and Franklin Richards. Is all bittersweet in terms of this hollow victory. And of course, they do eventually come back thanks to Franklin Richards because he's like a reality warping mutant. So he, you know, essentially a few months later, they come back because they was in this pocket dimension thanks to Franklin Richards because they all show up looking exactly the way they did as Franklin remembers them. Blah, 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 blah. And of course, they come back and the titles are called Heroes Reborn, which Uatu so graciously coined it because that's where they was going to be titling those issue 1 comics at that time. But then you get the epilogues was carried on after the fact where Peter Parker is on the scene of the whole aftermath where Grand Decree's spinning this to see like, oh, it's the mutants' fault while our heroes are dead and why Onslaught came to be in the first place. And Peter is just fuming because this dude's a freaking scumbag, a racist scumbag. And Xavier's pretty much wallowing in like depression at this point because he's blames himself despite Wolverine trying to console him because like, look, I know what you've been through, like I fought my demons too, you're trying to push us away, I've been there, I done the same thing, but you need people more than ever. But Xavier pretty much pushing back because like he's making a point to Wolverine. It's like, no offense Wolverine, but like what you go through, find your inner animal and stuff like that is no different from anybody else. What I went through is literally like caused like a, you know, large scale havoc. So at this point he's really talking to Xavier because he's pretty much like depressed, angry with himself because he let things get too far because he never dealt with his own inner pain at no point in time to alleviate any of his darker inner problems. He could have gone to some therapy. But then this woman from the government that is like part of mutant relations, I forgot what her name is, was Dr. Cooper. And she essentially come to arrest Professor Xavier. They don't know fully well how he's behind the Onslaught thing or if he even was Onslaught, but they know he had a hand in that somehow with his creation. So he need to be brought up on charges. And of course, most of the X-Men don't agree and don't want her taking him, but Storm and Jean point out at the fact that, look, we can't be above the law and if it was anybody else that wasn't tied to X-Men that done all that stuff, we would want them to be brought on charges, where they was willing participants or not. And so we got to do the right thing, and especially got to ease the tension with the public, because they're scared. Most of the city is destroyed or in shambles at the very least, and we need to like ease tensions right now as much as possible. And Xavier willingly give himself up because he knows he has to answer to all this, answer to what he's caused, like whether he, did it on purpose or not. He didn't, but Onslaught caused a lot of damage and he's responsible. But here's my issue after this point. He gets taken away by these mutant hating group, essentially, but not essentially, quote unquote, but this not Grandin Creed, Bastion guy who essentially has ties with Grandin Creed, and this dude is like just fly off the handle so quickly, like he comes across like all casual talking and stuff, and somebody counters him with some kind of like pushback. It's like, how did you do that? Yeah. It's like, it's all like, fly off the handle. It's like, okay, this dude's like clearly unhinged. You need to be like taking off the freaking board or something like that. This dude's like fly off the handle so quickly. But now, essentially, as Xavier points out, this dude isn't. I don't know what Cooper didn't do or what she did or did not do, why he's not even being taken by at least S.H.I.E.L.D. Have S.H.I.E.L.D. take him into custody. At least he'll be treated, properly as a prisoner instead of abused as a prisoner. Because Xavier points out, I haven't been indicted, I haven't been gone through the proper court system, I don't have a lawyer, any of that stuff. Essentially, he's being held captive against his will without proper due process. In this hidden facility, like off the books of facility, where he meets this other psychic named Nina, this little girl who bypasses the security systems, and she points out to Xavier, like, your powers are not gone, they just turned off. I can turn them back on if you want to. And Xavier's like, no, because he still don't trust himself with his powers, because his mind, well, due to all the stress and everything like that, he does not want to reignite another Onslaught incident. Of course, eventually he gets his powers back, But then, after realizing what this facility really is and what Bastion is really up to, he gets help from this other woman who's supposed to show up to evaluate Xavier. And thanks to Nina knowing what's inside her mind, she's a good person. She and her partner help get Nina out, because essentially Bastion ultimately executes any mutants he has in his facility, and they end up helping Nina get out. And thanks to their fake breakout, managed to get Nina to slip out and get outside help to pick her up so she can live a normal life. But that is pretty much the Onslaught story. Of course, like I said, it's tie-ins, but I only touched on stuff that has some level of importance to the overall narrative. This is the way I see it, because like the Hulk stuff, there's Hulk tie-ins and they don't really feed much into the bigger picture. He fights Cable for a little while, but they're just trying to get the Hulk involved in a way to help beat up on Onslaught. But I didn't include that because that didn't really feed into like the bigger picture. He can just have Hulk be there with the Avengers. Anyway, that is pretty much Onslaught. I thought it's pretty dope. In terms of nostalgic reasons, it's dope because just for the sheer premise of Xavier, just his bottled up emotions and all the stuff he's trying to do, and certain things that kind of bubble to the surface, or he feels like he's at the end of his ropes and he pretty much snaps. And they could have just left it at that, but they throw it in like, especially after him seeing his close friend who's turned to his villain snapping and attacking, overdoing it with his aggression against Wolverine, and pretty much like put him in almost darn near catatonic state after ripping his metal bones from him, and just like, okay, I had enough, and just snap and attack his best friend, and doing something he never would have done with anybody else ever. He swore never to do. He did it, and he did it with his closest friend. All that stuff, you could have just left it at that, but no, you gotta throw in this whole impish entity from, second impish thing from Magneto jumping on to the psychic plane of Xavier and infesting and cultivating and twisting Xavier's inner demons and stuff like that. He's like, you didn't need to add that stuff. You're good with what you had, with just, Xavier just being like mentally fed up. But and then just the fact that you're just using it as an excuse to just get rid of characters that wasn't selling all too well, which we know in hindsight, we know that's what they was doing. Of course, that wouldn't be the case anymore now, because thanks to the MCU, which, kind of sort of is like a precursor. This kind of would have been like precursor to lead into what MCU is now, thanks to Marvel selling off a lot of that stuff, with Fox getting X-Men and making the first X-Men movie, and Sony making the first Spider-Man movie, and which trailblazed to what we have with the first Iron Man movie in the MCU, all that other stuff. So without them doing what they did then, we probably wouldn't have what we have now, in a way, if you look back on that and look at the domino effect. Anyway, that was Onslaught. Decent story. Some might find it kind of clunky here and there. I definitely think like the biggest issue was the whole impish Magneto psychic entity thing jumping onto Xavier. I think that was probably my biggest grievance. But beyond that, I think it's a cool idea. Could make a great MCU movie. Like, a lot of Marvel characters involved. Essentially, the Dark Phoenix saga for Xavier. But leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of the Onslaught story. Have you read it recently? Highly encourage you check it out. There's an omnibus of it, so if you don't mind a few of the boring tie-ins, you will probably get something out of it. But anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow for more of Diablo 4, and the next X-Men story that I will be touching on will be Days of Future Past. No, I think it will be Age of Apocalypse. I keep getting those two confused because I think Age of Apocalypse happens first, then no, was it Days of Future Past? Whichever one that came first before, I'll deal with first and then do the other one second, because I'm pretty sure let me look it up really quick. 1981, Days of Future Past. Yeah, Days of Future Past came first, so I'll deal with that, then Age of Apocalypse after. So Days of Future Past first. That'll be the next comic. And the next movies that I'll be reviewing, because I already did like a review of Kiki's Delivery Service, which should be up on my YouTube channel pretty soon. Links are in the description below. Like and subscribe, share this with your friends. But the next movie I will be checking out is something I've been wanting to check out again for the longest time, is Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. That'll be the next movies I'll be reviewing within the week. Within the next week. So look forward to those. And I will see you guys soon. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Take care.